So Clare, I believe, is online, am I right? Fine. So Clare Price, next. She's the 20th Century Society's head of Casework. She's a chartered surveyor and has an MSc in the conservation of the historical environment. She's studying for a PhD in architectural history at Oxford University, researching into war churches. How interesting. Thank you, Clare. Over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm sure that was my cue, but I'm afraid I couldn't hear very well, so I'm just going to share my screen. Hang on a minute. There we go. Right, I hope everyone can hear me okay. Thank you. I'm thrilled to have been invited to speak to you today and to support Giles and all the team at St John's Waterloo as they fundraise to save their Feibusch mural. So I'm speaking to you today from a slightly different angle from most of the speakers. I work as head of casework for the 20th Century Society. Now, we're a national amenity society and a charity, and we were formed in 1979 to conserve architecture and design that comes in the 20th century, that's after 1914. So we're a statutory consultee in the planning process and have to be notified of applications to demolish or partially demolish any listed buildings that fall within our period. So my role really involves a lot of casework, that's dealing with individual applications, and we divide our casework up into secular and church casework. And although I do a bit of secular, the majority of my time I spend dealing with all the church casework for the society. So we're also a membership organisation, and we do talks and trips and tours. Frequently, these include examples of murals from our period, and you're very much encouraged to join if you're interested. The website details will be at the end of the slideshow. We also produce publications. This is one of our most recent ones, and if you're interested by anything you see in my talk today, you'll find a wealth of other examples in our lovely book. So I'm going to talk about murals, our campaigning, and cases in which we've had some involvement. These really are chosen to illustrate the difficulties with saving murals at risk. 20th century architecture and 20th century murals are very much at risk, but murals are not only under threat when a building is scheduled for demolition. We see many examples at casework that do not fall into this category, but are still extremely vulnerable. Many murals suffer because no one realises that they are there, for example, when they've been covered up, or when they're not recognised as significant. So the Feibusch mural at All Hallows, Southwark, which is covered up, is an example of what happens. This issue is a particular problem for 20th century murals, and for 20th century buildings, of course, in recognising their significance. Others are threatened by changes in environmental conditions of a building. This can be due to poor maintenance and repair, water ingress causing physical water damage, for example, or can be something slightly less obvious and what might be considered ordinarily to be part of an upgrade. Changing the heating is a particular danger to painted murals in churches because it can dramatically alter the humidity levels and affect either the medium used for decoration or the substrate underlying it. So what can be done? Getting specialist advice for conservation is vital. Moving a mural might be a solution. This is not ideal as it loses its context, and very often the context is deliberately used as inspiration for the design. But often I'm afraid it's necessary to prevent its complete loss, even in churches. So the most important first step is raising awareness and promoting their importance. And events such as this conference today are an essential part of this. One of the major campaigns run by the 20th Century Society in the past few years has been our mural campaign. This is aimed at raising awareness, especially of post-war murals, which we believe to be under particular threat. One of the main aims of the campaign was also to improve the legal protection available to murals and to persuade Historic England that designation of a mural in its own right, that is listing it, was a possibility. It was particularly gratifying for us when the first mural was listed in its own right and not as part of the building it was on. This ensured the removal and relocation of murals when the buildings are demolished. The definition of at risk used by Historic England when considering a building or a mural for listing involves the total or partial demolition of a building or alteration to it to such an extent that it would completely lose its architectural or historical significance. So this slide here shows you some of the secular murals that are currently at immediate risk. We've got Geoffrey Clark's Basildon mosaic, a beautiful picture called Pond Life in Halifax swimming pool, the Three Ships mural at Hull, and a 3 tons mural in Coventry's Bullyard by William Mitchell. As you may know, in 2021, Coventry is the city of culture and has at its heart the amazing post-war cathedral by Basil Spence, which is decorated with Jacob Epstein's sculpture, Ralph Bayer's carvings, and the ceramic copper candlesticks, which have been mentioned by earlier speakers today. But Coventry also has several stunning murals outside the cathedral, and the city's response to its 20th century legacy is to completely fail to recognise its importance, currently by proposing to demolish all the core buildings of the post-war city. Here, an entire 20th century city centre and its heritage is at risk. But I want to start with church murals by going back a little bit. Mural decoration was very popular in the 20th century, and many were executed as war memorials, such as this one, Walter Starmer's amazing scheme at Hampstead Garden suburb. The church was built to the designs of Edwin Lutyens, beginning in 1909, but not completed until 1935. After the First World War, it was decorated by Walter Starmer, starting with the Lady Chapel and finishing with the apse. The chapel is a war memorial and is decorated with the most incredible series of paintings for the time, as they feature famous women, both biblical and more recent. Starmer himself said that they were, and I quote, illustrative of various types of women who had laboured in various spheres for the furtherance of the kingdom of God, as witnesses for right as they conceived it, and for the extension of righteousness among men. Included are such prominent members of the suffragist movement and famous recent heroes such as Josephine Butler and Edith Cavell. I was very fortunate to have been shown these murals by Alan Walker, who has written a beautiful book about Walter Starmer and the murals. This visit was in connection with the church's campaign to fundraise to restore the murals. The building is built on a spring line, and this causes perennial movement problems, leading to the movement of the walls on which the murals are painted. And as far as I know, they're still trying to fundraise to save these. My next example is another interwar church, St John the Baptist in Rochdale, a landmark building in the town with a stunning white reinforced concrete dome. The interior is a joy. This is the apse mosaic mural. This was added to the 1927 church in 1933 by Eric Newton. He was part of an internationally renowned family firm that was based in Manchester and was born Erich Oppenheimer. He was the grandson of Ludwig Oppenheimer, a German Jew who was sent to Manchester to improve his English, married a local girl, converted to Christianity, and in 1865 set up the company that Erich, his grandson, was to work for. This mosaic depicts Christ the King as the central figure, surrounded by angels and the symbols of the 4 evangelists. The problem here is not that anyone who sees them doubts the beauty and impact of these mosaics. It is that no one really knows they're there. So the 20th Century Society has a number of regional groups of members who do the most amazing job at keeping us informed of potential cases, and they also do their own trips and tours. Our Northwest group toured the churches that Eric Newton decorated in the area a couple of years ago. And then we were thrilled when St John's was protected by an upgrade to Grade 2 star listing, specifically because of these murals. But it was really after the Second World War that murals became particularly fashionable and benefited from a wide range of patronage. from local authorities such as the London County Council, the New Towns Corporations, large retailers such as the Co-op and BHS, to universities, schools, and of course churches in particular. The huge scale of post-war reconstruction gave many opportunities for new commissions, and the exploration of new media such as concrete, and importantly, funding was set aside for the commissioning of new works of art, including murals. Churches are particularly well endowed. The patronage of figures such as Bishop George Bell and Walter Hussey, we've just been hearing about, was key. Murals became popular in churches because they provided a cheaper and more viable alternative to stained glass when materials were scarce. Perhaps the most important of church muralists after the war was Hans Feibusch. Feibusch was an active mural painter between 1933 and the 1960s in the UK. His first commission was at Sun House in Hampstead, where he was commissioned by the architect Maxwell Fry in 1934, which led directly to his commission for Edward Mills Methodist Church in Collier's Wood. The press publication of this brought him to the attention of the Bishop of Chichester, George Bell. A large number of commissions for church murals followed, the most requested subject of which was the Resurrection. Perhaps his most important collaboration was with the architect Thomas Ford in the Diocese of Southwark. The first of these was St John's Waterloo. This picture here is for the benefit of those joining us by Zoom, of course, and not able to see the original in person today. So St John's, as Giles told us earlier, was somewhat remodelled by Hitler, and Thomas Ford came in to revitalise the interior and was able to achieve special funding by linking the rebuilding to the Festival of Britain, a festival that generated so much art and design and experimentation. St John's is lucky to have such marvellous works by Feibusch, which I have come to know and love over the past few years, working with the church to realise their ambitious outreach plans. St Elizabeth Eastbourne contains perhaps the most impressive of Feibusch's church murals and dates from the earlier Sussex commissions. It is a huge mural which depicts the Pilgrim's Progress and was contained in the crypt of St Elizabeth's, a 1934 church perched on the top of a hill in Eastbourne. A listed building, we were involved in our role as statutory consultees. Structural issues meant that the church could not be used for worship, and the local congregation had moved into the hall and were asking permission to demolish the building. We appreciated the dire structural state meant that the church could not be saved despite its Grade 2 listing, but made very strong representations to the church commissioners not to allow demolition until the future of the Feibusch murals could be assured. We supported local campaigners attempting to raise funds to save the murals, but these attempts were beset by setbacks and the situation became increasingly desperate. At the last moment, the church commissioners stepped up with the funding for the murals to be removed by a conservation specialist. This was a very complicated and expensive process, involving them being transferred to a temporary framework, and they're now being stored in the conservationists' premises, awaiting a new home. But until these are re-erected, they will remain unappreciated and under threat. We were working with local campaigners to identify a new location for them before the pandemic unfortunately interrupted progress. So they are absolutely enormous, and that's one of the problems with finding a new home for them. But there are various opportunities, especially in the local area, that we hope will provide the right environment for them to be seen in their full glory. The Holy Rosary by George Mayer Martin is another one of our recent cases. We were contacted by Nick Braithwaite, the grandnephew of George Mayer Martin. You'll hear from Nick later on, so I won't spend a lot of time on this mural, except to say that when Nick contacted us, it was because he had found out that the diocese intended to close the church, and he was concerned that they would demolish the building and the mural would be lost. Partly overpainted by emulsion, the mural was unloved and its significance was not understood. Great confidence of success, I put it in for listing to Historic England. Unfortunately, they were not convinced, and not by the reports that Nick had commissioned specially to show that the rest of the mural existed under the overpainting, and turned the listing down. Since then, Nick has been working tirelessly to save the mural and to gather the evidence to convince Historic England and the diocese of its significance. Events like today are so important for signalling how much these works of art are valued and for getting the message through to those with the power to protect them, both legally and financially. So the patronage of the Chichester Diocese and Bishop Bell is the link to my next example. This is St Michael Berwick in Sussex. This has been a recent case of ours, which is a little different in that the murals are in a church of much greater antiquity. The murals here were painted during the Second World War from about 1940. The mural over the chancel arch depicts Christ in glory and was painted by Duncan Grant. Christ is seen in traditional Byzantine dress, whilst the four female angels below are in coloured dresses rather than the traditional white. On either side of the arch, the scene shows the hills of the Downs, the figures of servicemen in their uniforms on one side, and Bishop George Bell and the rector of Berwick Church on the other. The nativity scene was painted by Vanessa Bell. Again, there's the interesting mixture of traditional and modern depiction in the figures. Mary and Joseph in their robes, and other figures in the stable in modern dress. Once more, the Sussex Downs can be seen in the painting, this time through an opening in the stable. Just like Duncan Grant's mural over the chancel arch, this mural features depictions of local people. So we were consulted on this church as there were proposals to upgrade the heating. Unusually, the murals are mounted actually on separate boards and not painted directly onto the walls. Here, the proposals were specifically intended to improve the environment for the murals, as changes to the internal temperature and humidity of the church had caused a number of problems that were leading to the degradation of the murals and the growth of mould on the panels. Proposed works included the installation of underfloor heating and the insulation of the roof, intended to stabilise the conditions so that future deterioration will hopefully be avoided. We were very happy to support these proposals, which the church had drawn up with expert restoration advice. My title slide showed a very small detail from this mural, The Road to Emmaus by John Piper. I've had a long-standing discussion with this church over water ingress. You might be able to see at the top of this slide the staining on the ceiling where the water's been coming in. They have huge enthusiasm for their mural and their church and have been very, very proactive in promoting it by including it in part of the Harlow Sculpture Trail and also with links to the local museum, which is a lovely thing to do and something that really helps bring people's attention to these murals. Here's that detail again in case you missed it the first time. Thank you very much for listening.
Claire, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah, I enjoyed your paper, most interesting. In regard to all these murals that the 20th Century Society is trying to preserve and look after, are you keeping a kind of database of where they all are? And to what extent is the Church of England also assisting you in looking after works of art in churches generally? I mean, I know you're a separate organisation.
We are, yeah.
Yes.
We're entirely separate. We deal with all denominations. We have a database, we have a website that you can go and have a look at, and it lists, well, we try and keep it up to date, but we are a very small organisation run by a lot by volunteers, so it might not be totally up to date, but it has a map and you can go on it and see all of the murals that we're concerned about, and you can also let us know about ones that we might not have on it. I don't have direct links with the Church of England in terms of saving the murals. We are involved though whenever one is at threat.
But it's great that they're all being documented. I think that's terribly important, you know.
Well, it's very much part of our aim to educate and make people aware that how many there are and how important they are, because most of the time the problem I come across with church casework is that the congregation just don't realise what they've got.
Exactly.
And once they do, so many times they change their entire attitude to things, and people are always interested in their building and how they can use it and what they can do with it. And the most basic and most important thing is to understand what you have, and therefore you can then work out what the best thing to do with it is.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.